Chapter 22. The water is going down. Mirabelle blinked in the darkness. She felt Adelaide's arm wrapped around her. She lifted it and gently rolled away from her sleeping sister and crept slowly across the loft to the ladder. If I can get out the door in the early twilight when I can see well enough to run, but the sun has not yet appeared, I can go around and around the house many times before everyone else wakes up, thought Mirabelle as she moved slowly down the ladder and toward the door. She carried the wooden bucket out the door, set it down, and looked up at the sky. One lone star still peeked at her. Not one ray of sunshine could be seen, but the sky was brighter than the night sky. Mirabelle felt a puff of wind against her cheek. Then, far in the distance, she heard the faint sound of a rooster crowing to welcome the day. This was the only sound that ever entered Mirabelle's house from the neighboring farm. Mirabelle missed walking to this farm each day with a jug of goat's milk. Often Adelaide had joined her on this little errand to trade goat's milk for a basket of eggs. Adelaide called it the chicken farm. She liked to carry some kitchen scraps to the chickens in the empty egg basket. Mirabelle smiled when she remembered the first time she had allowed Adelaide to carry the full egg basket back through the forest to their home. Adelaide had stopped at each stone and each stick in the path. She would set the basket down, step over the stone, and then pick up the basket. This way, she could be sure she would not trip and break the eggs. Adelaide and Mirabelle had moved along so slowly that their mother had sent their older brother, Rowan, to find them. When Rowan found them halfway home, he had offered to walk the rest of the way with Adelaide. Mirabelle had to run home to tell their mother about Adelaide's especially careful journey with the eggs. The last time we had eggs, thought Mirabelle, was when Father brought 2 perfect eggs from the castle. Now Mirabelle ran around the house once, twice, 3 times. The 4th time, when she ran past the goats atop the woodpile, they leaped down and scampered after her. Near the door, she snatched up the bucket, then carried it, with the goats following, to the back of the house. Here, she gave each goat a turnip from the bucket and led Daisy to the stump. She placed the bucket under her and began to draw forth streams of milk. Adelaide appeared with the first rays of sunshine. "Can I try to milk Daisy?" she asked. "I think you're about as big as I was when I learned to milk," said Mirabelle. "Give me your finger and I'll show you how to squeeze out the milk." Mirabelle demonstrated, milking on Adelaide's finger. Then Mirabelle stepped aside and spoke to the goat. "Be of good cheer, Daisy. Adelaide will be very careful." Mirabelle was not surprised that it took Adelaide a very long time to finish milking the goat. She was surprised, however, that Daisy did not seem to mind. The other 2 goats clambered up and down the woodpile. Daisy did not hop down from the stump. She just stood there, calmly looking toward the goat yard. After helping Adelaide learn the art of milking, Mirabelle looked into the goat yard as well. "Look at that, Adelaide," she said. "The water in the goat yard was a tiny bit past that fence post. Today it only goes as far as the fence post, so it's a little lower than it was yesterday. It's only a tiny bit lower, but the flood has started to go down." It was as if Daisy was excited to hear this, for she jumped off the stump and ran into the goat yard and looked in as if she were thinking of saying something important about the floodwaters that had taken over her pen. At that moment, Sir Andrew appeared. "Good day," said Mirabelle. "Good day," said Sir Andrew. "Look at the goat yard," said Mirabelle. "The water is going down. Yesterday it was just past the post, and today it goes only as far as the post." "I might not have noticed that," said Sir Andrew, "if you had not pointed it out. Of course, we don't know what will happen next. The water may start to go down a lot every day, or the change may be very, very slow. We just don't know.
So does that mean that it's possible we could walk to town very soon?
Even if the water does go away quickly, said Sir Andrew, the flood season will be followed by a long mud season. Agnes, the cook at the castle, is so old that she remembers the last flood. She told me to warn everyone that the mud will be deep and will pull your boots right off your feet. It's best to stay home in mud season. Once the flood water goes away, the villagers will be able to walk on the streets in the part of town paved with cobblestones. The baker, the shoemaker, and the blacksmith are in that part of town and will open their shops, and the town well will be open. But homes elsewhere will have mud paths, and most people will be unable to travel for a long time. Even the king and the queen will be stuck, for the castle will be surrounded by mud. Adelaide had waited patiently while Sir Andrew talked about mud. Now she lifted the bucket and asked Mirabel,
"May I bring this to Mother?"
"Of course you may," said Mirabel.
"And you can tell Mother that you helped to milk Daisy."
Carrying the bucket, Adelaide moved very slowly across the yard. She stopped and set the bucket down when she came upon a stick. After stepping over the stick, she lifted the bucket over the stick and continued on. Chapter 23. Apple. Rondoin slept with his new throwing sack under his pillow. As soon as he opened his eyes, he felt under his pillow and pulled out the throwing sack. Sitting up, his finger traced around its edges to be sure all the seams were tight, especially the last spot that he had stitched up after filling the sack with peas. Rondoin closed his eyes and felt the weight of the throwing sack in his hand. It was about as heavy as an apple, and when he squeezed it into a round shape, it was as big as an apple. When he opened his eyes and pulled back his bed curtain, he smiled as he realized that the perfect name for his very red throwing sack was Apple.
"Good morning, Apple," said Rondoin.
"You are very young still, so I won't throw you just yet." Holding Apple, Rondoin slid his feet to the floor and walked to the window. "Look," said Rondoin, holding Apple up to see the view. "It looks like a lake, but it's not. It's a flood, and it will go away. And where there is water now, we will someday see fields of oats and barley. But you have to be patient. We don't know when the water will go away. Now, you must rest while I get dressed. Then you get to meet the chickens." Rondoin walked back to his bed, smoothed the pillow, and gently set Apple in the center of the puffy mound. He watched Apple while he dressed, and then gently tucked Apple into the deep pocket of his trousers. "You will be safe in there," he said, and then gathered up the food bucket and the water jug and made his way through the hallway to the balcony, where he placed the bucket and the jug on the floor. Sunrise ran right up to Rondoin. He scooped her up with one hand and used the other hand to reach into his pocket and pull out Apple. "Apple, meet Sunrise," he said. "Sunrise, meet Apple." Sunrise pecked at Apple. "Don't be afraid, Apple," said Rondoin. "Sunrise won't hurt you. Now, back to my pocket for a moment." Rondoin filled the food bowl, dumped the water bowl, and refilled it. And then he put straw in the basket and collected 2 lovely eggs. When he pulled Apple out of his pocket, he said, "I think it's time for you to learn to jump, but not here when you could fall off the balcony." Rondoin carried Apple into the hallway and set down the bucket and the jug. "Now, let's try one little jump," said Ronduin to Apple. He held Apple at waist level and gave the throwing sack a tiny toss, so it only flew up as high as Ronduin's eyes. Catching it, he said, "That was easy, wasn't it?" Ronduin threw Apple again and again, never higher than his head. He always caught Apple, and Apple never fell to the floor. "Are you ready to fly higher?" asked Ronduin. He looked at Apple for a moment until he was sure she was ready. He threw Apple up so high that she almost touched the high ceiling. When she fell down, he caught her. "If you like going high, we can try it again," said Ronduin. He was sure Apple liked flying really high, so he threw her again and again and again. Just when Ronduin was thinking that Apple had a magical ability to always land in the right place in his hands, she landed on the high part of the scaffolding. "Don't worry," said Ronduin. "I'll be right there." Ronduin clambered up as quickly as he could and found Apple leaning against a board. "You look like you want a rest," he said. "And it's time to check on the water in the first floor. I have to tell my parents whether it's going up or down or just staying the same." Ronduin put Apple into his pocket and, carrying the bucket and the jug, found his way around the scaffolding, down the stairs, and around the furniture stored in the second floor hallway. Ronduin left the bucket and the jug near the wall on the second step and took Apple out of his pocket. "I won't let you fly about in here," said Ronduin. "You just landed on the scaffolding because you're tired. I can't let you fly off to take a rest here, because if you're still tired and don't come right back to me, you could end up underwater." Ronduin was so busy talking with Apple that he got as far as the last dry step before he looked at the water level. Now he noticed something. "Look, Apple, the water has gone down half a step. The water was right up to this step, but now it's going down. It really is. Look, the water is still wet where the water was yesterday." Ronduin had not heard the door open at the top of the stairs, but now he heard his mother's voice. "Ronduin, you are late for porridge. The sun was fully risen long ago," she said. "I thought I might find you here." "I'm sorry I'm late," said Ronduin. "I guess I was distracted by my throwing sack. If you come down here, you can see what happened. The water is going down, and we have to remember this spot and take out a stone. It's gone down half a step." "Yes," said the queen. "We will want to mark the highest level. I will bring down this water jug, and we can leave it on the step that is at the highest level of the flood." Ronduin was about to slide Apple into his pocket, but his mother was already beside him, holding the water jug. "Oh, I see who you were talking to," she said. "Apple must be your throwing sack. When I was a child, I found a beautiful white stone. I named him Balder, and I talked to him every day. I would carry him around from room to room and take him outside. I liked to set him in the window in bright light, and he would seem to light up from within. I always felt that he made my day brighter. I think Apple will make your days brighter too." Chapter 24. A Bird in the Castle. Ronduin saw something in the distance. At least he thought he saw something. Standing by the door to the balcony, he looked down the third-floor hallway. Far down the hall, he saw the thing moving, flying through the air. It seemed above some of the scaffolding. Whatever it was, a bird maybe, it seemed to keep rising from below and then fall again, the way a small bird might fly up. Now, Ronduin stepped through the door onto the balcony to visit with Sunrise and Sunset. It was midday, and he found them sleeping together in one of the baskets. Ronduin didn't want to disturb the chickens, so he sat down on the other end of the balcony and took Apple out of his pocket. "I saw it again," Ronduin whispered to his throwing sack. Apple listened quietly. "I think maybe a bird is in the castle, but I'm not sure. Sometimes it seems to fly like a bird, but if it were a bird, I think I would sometimes see it resting. It goes up, then it comes down. I've seen it 7 times, 4 times yesterday and 3 times today." Just then, Ronduin heard Sunrise and Sunset clucking. Ronduin stayed perfectly still, thinking the 2 chickens might not notice him if he did not move. Sunset strutted to the food dish and pecked at the leftover porridge that Ronduin had brought to the chickens earlier that day. Sunrise joined Sunset, and together they clucked contentedly as they pecked their food. Neither chicken seemed to notice Ronduin, who sat as still as a statue. He sat there a long time while the 2 hens paraded up and down, apparently not realizing he had joined them. Ronduin sat cross-legged, with Apple sleeping on his left knee. He stared off across the water in the courtyard and toward the top of the castle wall in the distance. Then he blinked. "I think it's the bird again," thought Ronduin, sending his thoughts to Apple, but not speaking out loud. "Actually, maybe 2 birds, or 3. One pops up and falls down, then another. It's so fast it has to be 2 or 3 birds." Continuing to sit very still, Ronduin watched for a while, puzzling about what he was looking at. He did not notice that Sunset had quietly crept up close to him. Suddenly, she pecked at Apple. Ronduin was startled, yet he did not move one muscle. Now his attention was on Sunset, who had never dared to come so close to him. "Should I try to hold her?" Ronduin wondered. He watched Sunset peck again and again at Apple. Apple did not seem to mind. "I suppose if you can stay still while being pecked by a hen, then I can be still too," thought Ronduin, sending his thoughts to Apple. Suddenly, Sunset hopped up onto Ronduin's knee. Sunset's foot was on Apple, as if she were claiming the throwing sack for herself. Ronduin smiled, and then Sunset scampered away as if Ronduin's smile alerted her to the fact that he was not a statue after all. Ronduin stood and tucked Apple into his pocket. Back in the hallway, Ronduin found the empty basket that he had left on the scaffolding near the balcony door. He had it in mind to make up a game that he could play with Apple. He set the basket on the floor and took 5 backwards steps. Pulling Apple out of his pocket, he said, "Apple, we get 1 point for each step. If we can get you into the basket from 5 steps away, we get 5 points. Are you ready?" Apple looked interested in the game, so Ronduin gently threw her into the basket. 5 points for us, he said. He retrieved Apple and threw again. 5 more points, he said. Now we have 10. Ronduin's next throw hit the basket on the rim before it fell in. "I think I'll take away 1 point when it hits the rim," said Ronduin. So now we have 14 points. Ronduin retrieved Apple from the basket, and this time he walked backwards 6 steps. "Now we get 6 points for a good throw," said Ronduin. He threw Apple, and she flew right into the basket. "Now we have 20 points," he told her. Next, he walked backwards 15 steps. "We can get a lot of points if you can fly into the basket from here," he said. Ronduin threw Apple, but she fell short. He walked to Apple, picked her up, and again walked backwards 15 steps from the basket. "A little farther this time," he said to Apple encouragingly. This time, when he threw Apple, she went too far, After picking up the throwing sack, he stopped and looked at Apple, resting quietly in his hand.
What do you think, Apple?
He asked.
Is 15 steps too difficult for us?
He listened carefully and heard Apple tell him,
Let's try again.
Rondoin walked backwards 15 steps and threw Apple. This time she flew right into the basket. Rondoin ran to Apple, picked her up, and spun around and around, hugging her to his chest.
We did it! We did it!
Rondoin and Apple played this game for a long time. When they reached 293 points, Rondoin said,
If I take 7 steps this time, we will have 300 points.
He tossed Apple into the basket with ease. Satisfied, Rondoin realized he was very thirsty.
We can find water in the sitting room,
he said to Apple.
And then you can rest, and we can play again tomorrow.
Approaching the door to the sitting room, Rondoin noticed that it sat open. Just before entering, something in the far end of the room, behind one of the big stuffed chairs, caught his attention. Rondoin stopped and watched. Something flew up higher than the chair. He wasn't sure what it was, but it wasn't a bird. Before the object could fall out of sight behind the chair, a second object flew into the air. And as the first object fell out of sight, another object rose up. Rondoin did not know what he was looking at. It seemed like he was again watching the flying objects he had seen in the hallways and across the courtyard. And if they were not birds, what were they? Now, a person rose from behind the chair. They were facing the window, and Rondoin looked at their back. Startled, he realized that it was his mother, and she was doing something that appeared impossible. She was throwing 3 small things, one after the other, and the things went up and came down, and she caught them every time and threw them up again without ever stopping. It seemed that the things moved in a circle in front of her, and she made the circle go round and round effortlessly. Rondoin had never seen anything like this. He wondered where his mother learned this skill. Did a sorcerer teach her?